Not everything that happens in a hospital can be explained, but some stories, once whispered, refuse to be forgotten. Let's begin where the silence is loudest and the shadows are longest. Hospitals are where life and death collide every day. But what happens when that boundary is crossed, not by science or medicine, but by essence, but by something unseen, something unknowable? What happens when those who walk the halls at night begin to question whether they're truly alone? I've worked in hospitals long enough to know the difference between imagination and intuition. I've heard the stories. Some are harmless, a door creaking open, a sudden chill, a flicker of the lights. But others stay with you. They whisper in the quiet. They crawl beneath your skin. They ask questions you don't want answered. Tonight, you'll hear 3 of those stories, each one told by someone who lived through it. These aren't the stories people share over coffee or in staff meetings. These are the stories they carry in silence, tucked behind tired eyes and nervous glances. The kind of stories that only come out at 3 a.m. when the halls are empty, and the only thing louder than the machines is the sound of your own breath. These stories are not about belief, they're about experience. They're about what lingers after the final heartbeat, about what walks the corridors when the world sleeps, about the moments when logic fails and something else takes over. So ask yourself, if it happened to you, would you speak up? Would you tell someone? Or would you do what most people do? Look away, pretend it was nothing, and hope it doesn't happen again. Get comfortable, but don't get too comfortable, because some shifts never end. Let me take you inside the night shift. In Chicago, there's an old hospital where the night shift feels different. And among its long, quiet corridors, one name keeps coming back. Whispered, remembered, and respected. They say she never truly left. This is her story, the night shift. I started working the night shift at Riverside Hospital in the fall of 1997. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school, still clinging to the idealistic belief that I could make a real difference in people's lives. Riverside wasn't a fancy hospital. It was an aging 3-story brick building nestled at the edge of a wooded area in a quiet Minnesota town. The place had charm, they said. I would come to learn it had something else too. I was assigned to the surgical recovery wing, 2nd floor east, 12-hour shifts, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. My supervisor was a woman named Karen, a no-nonsense nurse with a permanent coffee mug in her hand and a look in her eyes like she'd seen things she didn't talk about. She trained me for 3 nights before cutting me loose. "There's a rhythm to this place," she said on my final training night. "If you're paying attention, you'll feel it. And if something feels off, don't second guess yourself." At the time, I didn't know what she meant. The first week was uneventful, mostly charting, monitoring vitals, refilling IVs. The floor was quiet at night, just the soft beeping of monitors and the occasional whisper of slippers on tile. I found comfort in the stillness. Until the 8th night. It was just past 2:30 a.m. I was finishing up notes at the nurses' station when a low chime echoed from room 217. Mr. Hale's room. Post-op heart surgery, mid-70s, recovering well. I walked down the hall. 2 overhead lights were flickering again. I made a mental note to file another maintenance request. The hospital had a habit of swallowing light after 2 a.m. I stepped into Hale's room, checked his vitals. Everything looked fine. I turned to leave and stopped. The IV drip had been adjusted, not by me, not by anyone on duty. The flow rate had changed, subtle but purposeful. Then I heard it. Click, click, click. Footsteps, deliberate, echoing down the hallway outside. Not rubber-soled nurse shoes, leather. I stepped out, glanced both ways. Empty corridor. No doors opening, no shadows moving, but the scent of rubbing alcohol filled the air. Sharp, sudden, unmistakable. I walked back to the nurse's station and checked the log. No one had been near room 217 in the past hour. When Karen arrived for shift change that morning, I told her what happened. She didn't flinch. "Did she look at you?" she asked. "I didn't see anyone." "But you heard her." I paused. "Her?" Karen sipped her coffee and nodded slowly. "Lydia," she said. "Don't worry, you'll get used to her." I thought she was messing with me, a rite of passage, a ghost story for the newbie. But over the next few weeks, I began to notice more. Equipment mysteriously prepped ahead of time. Charts refiled in Lydia's distinct order. Triage-based, handwritten tags. One night, a patient in 214, a little boy recovering from appendectomy, said a nice lady in white had sung him to sleep. We checked the cameras. No one had entered or exited the room. By the end of my first month, I wasn't laughing anymore. Karen eventually told me the whole story. Lydia Hammond had been head nurse in the 1950s, known for her meticulous organization and fierce compassion. During a particularly bad flu outbreak in '59, she'd stayed at the hospital for nearly 5 days straight. She collapsed in the hallway outside the surgical supply room and died before help arrived. They say she never clocked out. One night, around 3:10 a.m., I was restocking the med card near room 205 when the power flickered. The emergency lights hummed to life, dim, red-tinted. I stood still, heart thudding. A cold draft snuck past me, though the windows were sealed shut. Then I heard a voice, soft, whispery, like someone speaking through gauze. "He needs a fresh line." I turned. No one. I walked back to 205. The room had been empty earlier, but now Mr. Langley, an elderly diabetic patient, was sweating profusely. His IV line had clotted. I reinserted a new one and alerted the on-call physician. If it had gone unchecked, he might have gone into shock. No one believed me when I said I hadn't found him like that. That someone, or something, had told me to check. After that night, I began to feel her presence more clearly. It wasn't constant, but sometimes while walking the hallway alone, the air would change. The hairs on my arms would lift, and I'd feel like someone was walking just behind me. Other nurses had their stories too. A fall monitor that never triggered until Lydia appeared in the corner of a screen. A night when all clipboards in the central station fell simultaneously, then reappeared sorted perfectly. A missing medication suddenly reappearing exactly where it needed to be during a code blue. We never spoke of her openly, not because we feared her, but because there was something sacred about her presence, something protective, as if she was still watching over her floor, still caring for her patients, still mentoring new nurses like me. One night, during a snowstorm, we lost full power for over an hour. The backup generator only supplied essential systems. I was alone in the recovery hallway. The emergency call light blinked red outside room 211, but that room had been empty for days. I walked in, and there she was. Not a ghostly figure, not transparent or floating, just a woman, maybe mid-50s, in a pressed white uniform, cap perfectly centered. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her face was calm, kind, eyes sharp, but not unkind. She looked at me, then at the bed. There was no one there, but I stepped forward, instinctively checking the mattress. It was warm. When I turned back, she was gone. Years passed. I became the new Karen, training young nurses, watching for the look in their eyes when they had their first moment. Some would deny it, some would joke, but some, they'd nod slowly, and I'd know Lydia had introduced herself. In 2003, when they remodeled the East Wing, they tore down the old bulletin board. Behind it, written faintly in pencil, were patient names and Lydia's initials beside every one. The administrator wanted to paint over it. We didn't let him. We framed it instead. Sometimes I wonder why she stayed. Was it duty? Love? A refusal to abandon her post? Or maybe she simply couldn't rest, knowing there were still patients to care for, still mistakes to prevent. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Riverside has changed a lot since the 90s. New staff, new protocols, digital everything. But some nights, when things go strangely right, when a crashing patient is stabilized before anyone notices, or when a fresh nurse walks back from a room pale and shaken, we don't ask too many questions. We just say, "Lydia's on duty tonight." But it wasn't just about Lydia anymore. One winter evening, during my 5th year on the night shift, I was assigned to shadow a nursing student named Emily. She was 19, quiet, and had that wide-eyed nervous energy I recognized all too well. It was her first clinical placement, and she had no idea what kind of place Riverside could be after dark. The floor was quiet that night, unusually so. Fluorescents buzzed softly overhead. Emily and I did rounds, restocked meds, checked vitals. Around 2:45 a.m., she asked to take a moment alone to observe one of the patients sleeping. I nodded, watching her disappear into room 219. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I walked toward the room, half expecting her to have nodded off or be charting quietly. But when I opened the door, she was standing completely still, facing the window, pale, frozen. Her clipboard lay on the ground. The room was empty except for the patient, still sleeping soundly. I touched her shoulder gently. She turned slowly and whispered, "There was someone else here, a nurse. She told me not to be afraid." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but she wasn't frightened. She looked calm, moved. She said, "You're going to do fine. Just trust your hands." I smiled. I didn't need to ask what the nurse looked like. I already knew. Since that night, I've thought a lot about what it means to care for others, not just with medication and machines, but with presence, with instinct, with something that isn't in textbooks or training modules, something deeper. Lydia didn't just save lives, she shaped lives. She's the reason I stayed during the hardest nights, the reason I didn't quit when grief felt too heavy. And now when I walk those halls, older, slower, perhaps a little like her, I sometimes wonder, when I'm gone, will I stay too? Will my presence linger in the silence, a whisper of guidance, a soft click down the hallway? Hospitals are strange places. Built to heal, yet surrounded by so much loss. They carry memories in their walls, their vents, their floors. Some people believe these stories are just projections of a tired mind. But if you've ever walked through a hospital at 3 a.m. and felt the hair rise on the back of your neck, you know better. Maybe these experiences aren't ghosts. Maybe they're reminders that compassion never really dies, that every act of care, no matter how small, leaves something behind. So let me ask you, if one night, while walking alone through your workplace, hospital, hospice, nursing home, you feel a presence just out of sight, if you smell alcohol but no one's cleaning, if you hear a soft whisper saying, "It's okay, you've got this," will you run or will you whisper back, "Thanks, Lydia"? A thought to carry with you. If you're someone preparing for a career in care, nursing, medicine, emergency response, let this story remind you, your tools are not just clinical, they are emotional, intuitive, human. Trust your instincts, trust the silence, and above all, trust that you are never really alone on the night shift. Some hands still guide us, even long after they've let go, but not every presence brings comfort. Sometimes, the things that stay behind come crawling from somewhere much darker. The next story takes us into a retirement home on the outskirts of town, where something or someone moves like no human ever should. The Crawler. I've spent most of my life working security, warehouses, schools, even a museum once, but nothing stuck with me like the years I spent on the night shift at Pine Hills. It's a residential care facility tucked away at the edge of a wooded stretch in northern Montana. Officially, it was for elderly residents with mild cognitive disorders, but truthfully, it was where families sent loved ones they couldn't care for anymore. You know, the place you hope you never end up in. The building itself was old, Built sometime in the 60s, I think. Low ceilings, too many blind corners, long quiet halls that creaked even when no one moved. At night, it had a silence that didn't feel natural. The kind that wasn't just the absence of noise, but the presence of something else. I took the job because it was steady, and it paid well enough. The patients rarely wandered, and the other staff mostly kept to themselves. I'd do my rounds, walk the perimeter, and spend the rest of the time drinking bad coffee in the control room, half watching the black and white monitors. The first few weeks were quiet, uneventful, but there was always something about the East Wing that bothered me. It had been closed off for years, supposedly due to mold and electrical issues, but no one ever seemed in a hurry to fix it. I asked a nurse once if they planned to renovate it. She just shook her head and said, "Some places aren't meant to be reopened." I thought she was being dramatic, until they brought in Mr. Theodore Clark. He was a late admission, no family listed. Arrived under vague psychiatric evaluations. The paperwork said episodes of nocturnal behavior, which I figured meant sleepwalking. He was thin, pale, with deep-set eyes that never quite focused on anything. They gave him room 9, right at the end of the North Hall, as far from the main patient group as possible. That should have been a sign. Within a week of his arrival, things began to change. First, it was the cameras. The feed for the North Hall would cut out every night around 3 a.m., like clockwork. Not static, just black. I reported it multiple times. Maintenance checked the wiring, replaced the camera, even installed a new monitor. Same result. Blank screen from 2:58 to 3:10, every single night. Then came the sounds. At first, I thought it was my imagination. A soft scraping, like skin dragging across tile. Sometimes I'd hear it during my rounds, low, wet, and constant, coming from just around the corner. But when I turned, there was nothing, not even a breeze. I tried rationalizing it. Pipes, shifting foundations, but Pine Hills didn't make noises like that during the day. Only at night, only near room 9. I started avoiding that part of the building during the rounds, telling myself I was being foolish, but I couldn't ignore what started happening next. Residents began reporting things, strange dreams, sleep paralysis, visions of something crawling under their beds. One woman insisted something had whispered her name while brushing her hair. Another refused to sleep with the lights off anymore. Staff dismissed it as dementia, but it was spreading. These weren't isolated cases. One night, a janitor quit mid-shift after walking past the North Hall. He said nothing, just left his cart in the hallway and never came back. I started carrying a flashlight with extra batteries, even though the hallways were well lit. And still, every time I approached room 9, I felt it. That weight, that pressure in the chest, like something was waiting just out of view. It all came to a head one night in late November. I was halfway through my shift. The air had that electric tension you feel before a storm. The lights flickered once, then the camera for the North Hall cut out again. Black screen, 2:58 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way down the corridor. I didn't even know why. I wasn't brave, and by then, I knew better. But something told me if I didn't go that night, it would come to me instead. The hallway was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. I passed rooms 5, 6, 7, silent. But when I reached room 9, I stopped. The door was wide open. Inside, it was pitch black. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I aimed it toward the bed. Empty, but the sheets were tangled, like someone had left in a hurry. And under the bed, there was a long smear, something dark, trailing from the mattress to the floor, disappearing behind the far wall. Then I heard it, not from inside the room, but above me. A soft, wet, dragging sound, like something pulling its weight across the ceiling tiles. I looked up, slowly. There was nothing, just the cold hum of silence, but I knew I wasn't alone. I turned and backed out of the room, keeping my light aimed ahead. As I reached the hallway, the scraping grew louder, closer, not behind me, above me. I didn't run. I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond the way it should have. I walked one foot after the other toward the control room, trying not to look back, trying not to listen. When I finally reached the door, I slammed it shut behind me, locked it, and stared at the monitor. The feed from the north hallway flickered on, and for a split second, just a second, I saw it. A figure crawling along the ceiling, head twisted at an unnatural angle, limbs elongated, eyes reflecting the light like an animal caught in the dark. Then static. I didn't sleep the next day, or the one after. 2 nights later, Mr. Clark was gone. No discharge, no transport, no body. His file was removed from the system. The nurses stopped mentioning him. When I brought him up, they looked at me like I was confused, mistaken. One even asked if I'd been working too much overtime. Room 9 was repainted, reassigned. I never went back there. I left Pine Hills 3 weeks later. Told them I had family matters to attend to, which wasn't exactly a lie. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't sit in a quiet room without thinking I heard that dragon sound overhead. Even now, years later, I keep the lights on at night. I don't sleep facing the wall. I never leave my feet uncovered. And every so often, just as I'm drifting off, I hear something shifting above me, like fingers brushing the ceiling. I tell myself it's the house settling, or squirrels, or anything but what I really think it is. Some things don't die. Some things just move on to the next building, the next hallway, the next person who doesn't know to look up. There's a reason we close off parts of old buildings. Sometimes it's mold, sometimes it's just too expensive to renovate, and sometimes it's because what lives there doesn't want to be seen. It just wants to watch and wait. If you're ever alone on a night shift and you hear something crawling, don't look up. Not unless you're ready for it to look back. What if the scariest part isn't what you see, but what you remember long after it's gone? In this next story, a retired nurse returns to the hospital that shaped her life, only to realize that some memories never leave, and some footsteps never truly fade. Echoes in the hall. I never meant to go back to Greenfield. After 30 years of walking those halls, listening to the beeping of machines and the whispered confessions of people teetering between life and death, I thought I had left it all behind when I retired. But memories don't retire. They wait. They settle in the corners of your mind like dust in forgotten stairwells. And if you spend enough quiet nights alone, they begin to rise again, sometimes gently, sometimes like a storm. It started with a letter, an invitation, really. A small reunion for staff members who had served more than 20 years at Greenfield Central. Most people probably saw it as a kind gesture, a chance to reconnect, to reminisce over coffee and polite laughter. I saw it as a test. Could I walk those halls again without breaking? It was a cold April morning when I stepped through the front entrance. The lobby had changed. Brighter walls, new chairs, cheerful plants placed like bandages over old wounds. But beneath the fresh paint, I felt it. That familiar hum. A kind of energy that lives only in hospitals. The intersection of endings and beginnings. And something else. Something older. I didn't go straight to the reception hall. My feet carried me down the east corridor before I could stop them, toward the old ICU wing. They'd moved most of it to the upper floors years ago, turned this part into storage and overflow, but some doors still bore the faded room numbers, like the ghosts of patients past were keeping watch. Room 217. That door stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't thought of Samuel Lee in years, but suddenly I could feel his hand in mine. Cold, thin, holding on until the very last second. He had no family, no visitors. He'd asked me once, in that soft rasp of his, "Do you think people know they've died, Nurse Barron? Or do they just keep waiting for someone to tell them? I didn't know what to say then. I still don't. He passed at 3:43 a.m. on a Wednesday, alone except for me, and I stayed with him long after the monitors had gone quiet. I remember smoothing the sheets, brushing the hair from his forehead, whispering, "You're not alone." I think part of me needed to believe that as much as he did. 2 nights later, I was charting in the ICU station when I heard humming. Soft, familiar, a tune I hadn't heard in years. It took me a moment to place it. Vivaldi, Samuel's favorite. I turned toward his old room. The hallway was empty, but the humming continued, lingering like steam in the air. I followed it, slowly, breath shallow, and found nothing. Just the sound and the sudden, undeniable scent of antiseptic and something faintly floral, like an old cologne. I never told anyone. What was I supposed to say? That I'd been followed by a song and a smell? That the past had tugged at my coat like a child needing comfort? But that night changed me. From then on, I stopped looking for explanations, and I started listening. Greenfield had always been strange after dark. During the day, it was like any other hospital, chaotic, noisy, practical. But after midnight, it softened. The walls seemed to breathe. Shadows stretched longer than they should. The machines felt more alive than the people they monitored. I remember walking the halls during those hours, the balls of my shoes whispering against the tile. I wasn't alone, though the floor often was. There were always footsteps, not echoing mine, but slightly behind or ahead, like someone taking just one step less than I did. I learned not to stop too quickly. If I did, I'd hear the final step that didn't come from me. Always. At first, I thought it was stress, sleep deprivation. But then Janice died and things changed. Janice Weller, my best friend, my sister in Scrubs. We worked side by side for 20 years. She was the loud one, the brave one, the kind of nurse who held dying patients like children and told them everything would be okay, even when it wouldn't. When she passed suddenly, aneurysm, gone before she hit the floor, I felt something snap in the hospital, a silence deeper than grief, like the building itself had lost someone. 2 weeks after her funeral, I was doing rounds alone. I passed room 214, her favorite. She always said the lighting was best there, and the door was slightly ajar. I peeked in, expecting darkness. Instead, I saw her chart, her handwriting, fresh ink. No one else had been there. I took it as a message, a reminder, or maybe just her way of saying, "I'm still here." Over the years, the hospital collected stories, a supply cabinet that restocked itself, a call light that blinked in the rhythm of a patient's dying heartbeat long after he was gone, a nurse who smelled lavender every time she entered room 219, even after they painted over the walls and changed the floor tiles. No one talked about it formally, but in the break room, in the elevator, during those 3 a.m. coffee refills, we'd share glances, quiet nods, unspoken understandings. Greenfield wasn't haunted, it was remembering. And those of us who gave our lives to it, we were part of that memory. After retirement, I tried to move on, bought a small cottage upstate, tended a garden, read books that had nothing to do with medicine. But at night, I'd dream of the hospital, not the trauma, not the blood or the codes or the heartbreak. No, I'd dream of the hum, of steady footsteps, of someone just behind me, waiting. I once woke up to the smell of antiseptic and lavender. My house doesn't have either. I whispered, "Janice?" into the dark. No answer, but the room felt full. At the reunion, as I stood in the old hallway, a young nurse passed me. She smiled politely, then paused. "You used to work here, right?" she asked. I nodded. "People say you were kind." I didn't know what to say. It felt like the highest compliment I'd ever received. She leaned in slightly. "Do you ever feel like someone's still walking these halls at night?" I looked at her for a long time, then said, "Yes, but not someone to fear." She smiled, relieved, and I realized in that moment that I wasn't the only one who'd been listening. We talk so much about letting go, but what if some things choose to stay? Not out of anger, not out of confusion, but out of love. What if the echo you hear isn't a haunting, but a thank you? What if the footsteps in the hall are just someone checking in, making sure you're not alone? I'm not afraid to die, not because I'm brave, but because I know what waits on the other side might just be the same hallway, the same hum, the same perfume, and maybe, just maybe, Janice will be there, holding a chart, waiting to tell me that room 4 needs restocking. So if you ever find yourself alone in a hospital hallway, and the silence feels full instead of empty, if you catch a scent that doesn't belong, or hear a breath that isn't yours, don't be afraid. Smile, say hello, and keep walking. Some echoes are just love that refuse to fade. Every hospital has its own rules. Some are written, others are passed in whispers, but when one doctor chose to break them, what followed became a warning, a legend, and a silence that speaks louder than truth. The rules he broke. The first thing you learn as a nursing intern isn't how to draw blood or place an IV. It's silence. How to speak only when spoken to. How to observe without reacting. And above all, how to listen, carefully, to what isn't written in the charts. It was my first night on the floor at Northgate Medical, and I was already shaking. The kind of nerves that settle under your skin and don't leave, no matter how many deep breaths you take. I was assigned to the overnight shift, shadowing with 4 other interns. Megan, a quiet girl from out of state. Theo, who joked too much when he was nervous. Kiara, fiercely smart with eyes like she'd seen everything already. And Caleb, who always stayed a step back, as if trying to disappear into the walls. The supervising nurse, Rebecca, gave us a rush tour, then left us in the break room around 2 a.m. "Keep yourselves awake, don't wander, don't ask too many questions," she said before disappearing down the hallway. That last line stuck with me. Theo, of course, was the first to break the silence. "You guys ever hear about Dr. Halberg?" No one answered. He smirked. "Guess not." I hadn't heard the name before, but when I looked around, I saw the others stiffen. Megan glanced at the hallway like she expected someone to be standing there. Kiara folded her arms. Caleb didn't look up from his notebook. "What about him?" I asked quietly. Theo leaned forward. "He used to work here. Long nights. Neurosurgeon. People said he was brilliant. Too brilliant." "You don't get fired for being too brilliant," Kiara muttered. "He wasn't fired," Theo said. "He just left. One day, he signed out and never came back. Didn't pick up his things. Didn't answer calls. It's like he vanished." The fluorescent light above us buzzed. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Megan, barely above a whisper, said, "I think he broke one of the rules." "What rules?" I asked. She looked at me, wide-eyed. "The ones they don't write down." Every hospital has them, unspoken rules. They pass from nurse to nurse, through glances and muttered warnings during shift changes. Don't open room 306 after midnight, even if the call light's on. Don't look too long in the nursery mirror. Don't ask about the extra bed in the supply closet. I didn't know them yet, but everyone else seemed to. Megan told her story first. It was her second week when she saw Dr. Halberg late at night, long after his shift should have ended. He was walking into room 309, an old patient room that had been converted into storage. She followed him, confused, thinking maybe someone needed help. But when she reached the doorway, he was just standing there in the dark, facing the wall. He didn't move, didn't turn. She didn't say a word, just backed away and left. 2 days later, room 309 was sealed. Megan asked why. Her supervisor told her there was no such room. That was when she stopped asking questions. Kiara went next. She was was on a different floor, monitoring post-op recovery. She'd stayed late to finish charting. Around 3:10 a.m., she heard footsteps outside the room, slow, dragging, like someone walking with an uneven gait. She peeked through the blinds. Dr. Halberg was walking past, only he wasn't walking, he was gliding. His feet never touched the floor. She blinked, looked again. He was gone. Later that week, the hallway cameras glitched during the same time, every night. They showed static, then black, then static again. Kiara didn't report it. She said the techs would find nothing. She was right. Theo had a different story. He said he once caught Dr. Halberg talking to a patient who'd already died. He was on his way to grab linens when he passed room 214. The door was open. Inside, Halberg sat at the edge of the bed, murmuring, nodding, listening, but there was no one else there. The bed was empty, sheets pulled tight, no record of anyone assigned to that room. When Theo told another nurse, they laughed, said that room hadn't been used in years. He stopped asking after that. When it came to Caleb, we all turned toward him in silence. He didn't speak right away. Then softly he said, "He told me not to look." It was his first week. He was doing vitals near the east stairwell, the one that connected to the sub-basement. The door was supposed to stay locked, but that night it was ajar. He peeked inside. Dim light, dust, faint breathing. Dr. Halberg stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding something, a chart, or maybe a file. He looked up at Caleb and said, "Don't look too long, it looks back." Then he turned and walked into the dark. The next day, the stairwell was chained shut. No one admitted to doing it. No one mentioned Dr. Halberg. That was when I understood something none of them had said outright. We weren't supposed to be talking about him. Not because he was dangerous, but because he'd seen something. Something he shouldn't have. And we all knew hospitals had places you didn't go. Moments you didn't question. Rules you didn't break. The silence in that break room felt heavier now. Like something was listening. Like someone. I stood, restless, wanting to clear my head. "I'm going to refill my coffee," I said, motioning toward the hall. Theo smirked. "Don't take the east corridor." I nodded, but I did anyway. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I didn't believe. Not really. The east corridor was dim, the kind of dark that swallowed corners. My shoes clicked softly. The coffee machine sat at the far end, humming quietly. And across from it, room 309, unmarked, sealed. But the door wasn't fully closed. It stood open a crack. Light spilled from underneath. I should have walked away. I didn't. I stepped forward, pressed my hand against the wood. "Cool." I pushed gently. The door creaked open. Inside, empty room, pale green walls, flickering light. A single chair sat in the middle, facing the wall, and on the wall, there were notes. Papers pinned and taped, written in erratic handwriting. Diagrams, scribbled phrases. Some pages were torn, others soaked in something brown. Blood. I stepped closer. The writing was frenzied, unstable. One phrase was repeated over and over. "He saw too much." And below it, in smaller print, "Don't listen when the walls talk back." I stumbled backward, heart racing, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. I turned. No one. The room was cold now. Too cold. I left the door open, ran back down the corridor, didn't speak. When I returned to the break room, the others looked at me. Theo raised an eyebrow. Kiara frowned. Caleb nodded once, if a minute, as if confirming something. No one asked where I'd gone. They didn't need to. Later, when I became a full-time nurse, I learned the rest. Dr. Halberg had been researching patient deaths that weren't in the records. He'd stayed late reviewing files that didn't exist. He'd entered rooms that weren't on the blueprints. He heard voices in the vents, followed trails of blood that were gone by sunrise. Then one day, he wrote something in the staff logbook. Just one line. "I made contact. I shouldn't have." Then he vanished. We don't say his name anymore. Not in full, not out loud, but every new group of interns hears the whispers, the fragments, the warnings, and the one rule we all agree on now. If you see something you're not supposed to, don't look twice. And if you hear your name whispered from an empty hallway, don't answer. Some things in hospitals aren't meant to be fixed. Some aren't broken at all. They're watching, waiting, and they remember who broke the rules. Some stories ask to be heard, others demand to be remembered. And now that you've walked these halls with us, perhaps, you'll never walk alone again. Some things end when the heart stops, but not everything. In places like these, quiet rooms, fluorescent lights, long hallways that never sleep, memories linger longer than they should. Not because they're trapped, but because they're remembered, held, carried forward by those who stayed. We walk through hospitals thinking of them as places for healing, but they are also museums of last words, archives of final breaths, the kinds of places where silence doesn't mean absence, only presence in a softer form. There are names that no longer appear on staff lists, doors with no labels, rooms no one talks about, but someone still visits them, still waits there. And if you listen carefully, not just with your ears, but with your skin, your breath, the part of you that knows before your mind can catch up, you'll feel it too. Some stories were warnings, others regrets, some, maybe, quiet thank yous, but all of them had one thing in common: they never really left. So if one day you find yourself standing alone under cold lights and a door opens slowly down the hallway, don't be so quick to run. Some echoes don't come to frighten, they come to be heard. And the most haunting thing of all is that sometimes we hear them and choose to keep walking.